Fairfield, oh lucky Fairfield, we have with us Chuck Mitchell. Chuck Mitchell, of course, being one of our great, I'm going to call you a folkster. You're a folkster.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
Singer-songwriter and also appreciator and sort of archivist for great American music, for traditional music too. We're going to get into all of this, but this might be the appropriate music to have in the background as I ask you this question, which is well, tell us a little about yourself.
Please don't take my sunshine away. I should tell you a little about myself.
A little about yourself.
Oh, golly, I've been doing this a long time, Mike, since 1965,
Cool.
full-time. I started playing the guitar when I got out of college in are you ready for this, 1958, because I'd been used to having accompanists. I was always a singer. I wasn't a guitar player. And so at the ripe old age of 21, I got out of college and I discovered that if you went to New York City to become an actor, which I did, summer of '58, well, I'd gotten my training in English, and I had a degree in English literature, the world's most useless bachelor degree.
and yet,
well,
such a traditional one.
Yeah, it's the old
gravitates.
humanities trip, the liberal arts thing. My father always said I could go to whatever, the Harvard Business School after I'd gotten my liberal arts degree. So I did that, and it had a minor in drama because I was taken with, I'd always been a ham. So I did the ham thing and got the degree in English, and then I went, after a summer of chasing around, going to a friend's wedding to be the best man and so forth, I ended up in New York. Stayed at the Henry Street Playhouse, or the Henry Street Settlement House, and worked in the mail room where they sent out all the flyers and stuff, and found that they had a guitar teacher. So I started taking guitar lessons at the Henry Street Settlement House, and I did that for a while, and I went to an awful lot of cattle calls, you know, where they bring in 100 actors, and I discovered very quickly that it wasn't an easy road at all. And about that time, not quite sure what I was going to do with myself, I got drafted. So I ended up going to the Army through 16 weeks of Fort Knox, Kentucky, 8 weeks of basic, and then I learned how to drive a tank and shoot a variety of weapons. I did my ordnance thing and ended up then going to Korea. The war was over by then, and I did Korea. I came home having been a journalist for Stars and Stripes.
Wow.
And then I moved on to working for the Board of Education in Detroit, which is where I'm from originally, Rochester, Michigan. Madonna and I grew up in Rochester. And then I briefly, I spent several years working for the Detroit Board of Education. And then I started singing in saloons in Detroit at that point, and coffee houses. And in 1965, on my first out-of-town gig, having given up my job, a day gig, I decided I'd do this full-time at the Board of Education, City of Detroit. I went out of town to Toronto, and I met a girl named Joni Anderson in Toronto, and we had a whirlwind courtship, I guess you'd call it. She came down to Detroit on the train a couple of times, and we got married, and she became Joni Mitchell. And so that story began at that time. We were together a relatively brief time in my life, only from 65 to 68. She went her way, I went mine, and I spent the next, well, to the present day, since 1965, being a full-time musician.
That's amazing.
And that's the story. I've traveled all over the place and done my thing.
Have you, as I mentioned earlier, I feel like you're an archivist of great American music.
Not by choice, but
no, but it's still your catalog is pretty awesome, pretty amazing. The span of it is great. Who are some of your favorite composers?
Well, I do like, in spite of the difficulties we had, I still think Joni is a great piece. She's a great performer. Probably the best, least known person, the best known, but how can I put this? my probably all-time favorite, the person whose music I do the most, is Michael Peter Smith, versus there's a gospel singer who happens to be named and composer named Michael Smith.
Yeah.
But this is the Michael Smith who wrote "Let Us Go to the Banks of the Ocean."
Dutchman.
The Dutchman.
Yeah,
He wrote
what
the
a
Dutchman
great song.
and "Oh Spoon River" and a number of wonderful songs. Fred's Bank. He's written hundreds of wonderful songs, and so. I met him. One of the places that was on my circuit back in the '60s and '70s was a place called the Flick in Coral Gables, run by a retired shoe store salesman and his wife, Max and Annie Launer, and Michael and I both headlined at that wonderful club, along with a lot of other people. Gabe Kaplan was there, the guy who did Room 222, the comedian. He played there, and Michael Martin Murphy, who is now the cowboy artist, but he did, what's the name of his song?
Fire. He had a huge Wildfire.
Wildfire, that was his big hit, and he had several others. Yeah. But at any rate, back to your original question, I'm very taken with the work of Paul Simon.
Paul Simon.
Neil Young is one of my favorites. The people who write disarmingly simple songs, and that list goes on. I mean, I still learn standards, stuff like "I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places," and I've always sought other people's work, partly because I'm a songwriter. I write my own tunes. In fact, when we do tunes, I'm going to sing my own stuff.
And thank you for performing for us in a little bit. But
hey, it's fun.
It's amazing
it's
to have you here. I've seen you at Cafe P. I don't know how many times, and we've tried to get this appearance together, and the show is ending. But I'm really glad we finally got you on the last episode. Thank you so much.
Well, I understand it's not as if it's ending. Phase 2 point something is ending, and then maybe there'll be a 3 and a 4 point. Who knows?
I think we're going to jump right to 3.0, and who knows what that's going to be.
All right.
But I'm really appreciative you're here. And as you were mentioning songwriters, favorite songwriters, I have to say, from me, my two favorite songwriters are Paul Simon and Joni Mitchell. And I did get to spend some time with Joni. I worked on some projects with her while I was at Universal, a box set of her Geffen material, and also a protest.
Oh, so you actually worked with her. You've seen her since I've seen her. I haven't seen her in many, many, many years.
But you've spoken over the years?
Not very much.
Okay.
No, it's she's difficult to... She has her own narrative that she has her own narrative. And she's no longer Joni the Princess. She's Joan the Queen. She's Queen Joan.
She is Queen Joan.
And
I'll share with you, just so we can sort of bond over this. I had many. We became close friends too.
Good. Say hello.
I know. Well, but as what usually happens, that isn't where I'm going here. As what usually happens, Joni moves on. Anyway, during the time that we were interacting together, we'll say, there's the box set, and there was this one. You're going to love this story. One time, about 3 in the morning, Joni calls. She calls and she goes, they're always on Pacifica Radio. Pacifica Radio was the most left-leaning, thing we had in California.
Yeah, I know about them. Roz and Julia and Larman. They were my faves when I lived in California for many years, so I know about the Pacifica and the Larman. So go ahead. What's your story?
She calls me at literally 3 in the morning, and she goes, they're always playing. It's like out of nowhere. It's sort of like, they're always playing Buffy St. Marie's Universal Soldier. Why aren't they playing any of my music? And I'm like, is this Joni?
You're not a communist.
Is this Joni?
You're not a socialist.
So that led into a conversation which was like, well, Joni, how about, which led into a conversation of, well, what are you guys doing with my material? This was like phase 2 of when I was interacting with her. I want to use that word just to be kind. So what happened after in the second phase, we did a collection called The Beginning of Survival, which was a collection of all of her political stuff and her sort of more environmental stuff. So that ended up on one disc. It's, in some respects, my favorite project. In some respects, it's unlistenable, because by the time you're done from one of those to the end, you've been beaten up so much. But it was a statement. It was a statement. It was exactly right on, and I really appreciate it. That was a couple of my favorite periods with her.
Fellow stepping stone.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh, man.
At any rate, before we get off other composers, the unknowns, Cheryl Wheeler.
Cheryl Wheeler.
The best one of the best around. She wrote that amazing song, If It Were Up to Me. If it were up to me, I'd take away the guns. She's done this unbelievable rant, which it took me 4 or 5 years to learn, and I basically have it. But, and the other one, Cheryl Wheeler has written beautiful songs. And then the other one is Fred Eaglesmith. Out of Ontario, Canada, farm boy, who's a rocker, and he reminds me a little of Bob Seger. His music is universal. He's written terrific songs.
You know who loves him also? Bruce Springsteen.
Well, good for Bruce. Yeah. I do particularly a song called "Time to Get a Gun," and I like to do. I call them. They're connective songs. I call them combinations. So I take a tune like Michael Smith's. I take Joni's Circle Game and a Carl Sandburg poem called Out of Windows Look Mother Faces and a Michael Smith tune called The Grandmother's House and put them all together and come up with something which I hope is greater than the sum of its parts. And I do that with Cheryl Wheeler. I do If It Were Up to Me, which was written after Columbine, after the shootings at Columbine. And then Fred Eaglesmith's song, Time to Get a Gun, which is a takeoff on the John Wayne, American John Wayne, from an Ontarian standpoint. If it were up to me, I'd take away the guns, says he. And he sings, time to get a gun, that's what I've been thinking. I could afford one. If I did just a little less drinking, time to put something between me and the sun. When the talking is over, it's time to get a gun. I like that. I like putting them both together and letting people sort it out amongst themselves.
Can I add another one to your medley?
Sure.
You want to check out Bruce Coburn's If I Had a Rocket Launcher? Which sort of ups the ante.
I could get If I Had an RPG.
That's sort of where we're going.
That's great.
But you drove the tank, so this is all fun.
Yeah, and I learned what's really fun. They're exactly the same. When you shoot a 50 caliber machine gun, at least the ones I had, they had treadles, one for each thumb. So you'd grab the handles and you'd push down on the treadle and you could bum, 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 bum. Here's this thing firing off these rounds that are 50 calibers, big ones.
Can I ask you something else also? Since you were in the military and you also, the type of songs that I've heard you sing are very progressive songs, and the progressive side of things is normally you try not to get into war.
Progressive is a synonym for liberal in my book.
Yes, and mine too. But if you want to, in looking at it from those two perspectives, you have a knowledge of authority. Where I'm going with this, we have a knowledge of authority from having been in that situation. So your singing these kinds of songs, I think, gives you more. It isn't just somebody singing it from the perspective of, oh, let's all just be peaceful and whatever. You actually were in the military, and you kind of know. From the perspective of, you know both sides now, you might say. And
there's still people out there that will beat the crap out of you if you give them the opportunity. Yeah,
all right. And there's also the Second Amendment argument, which has stimulated.
And I'm surrounded, a lot of my buddies that I went to college with are ex-CIA, ex-Marines. And I was in the Army, but if you want to get seriously military, typically the Marines were better trained, and there is a Semper Fi thing that goes on with them that is not typical of a draftee, at least.
Yeah.
Not that I don't respect. That was an experience that I'm a believer in universal military training. I think the Swiss have it right, and the Israelis, in that it's like outward bound in a way. If you've never knuckled under and set your ego aside and learned what it's like to be operating with the lowest common denominator and to be in a platoon with a sergeant, with a lieutenant, and so on. If you've never fired and maneuvered and done all the stuff you do in the military, you really have never, it's Zen sounding, but you haven't laid your ego aside. You haven't become part of the great unwashed, which is also, you haven't become a part of the Borg.
You have to be part of the Borg in order to
to mix Star Trek with.
I'm just, and I agree with you totally. I feel like there's the tradition that has happened through centuries. Here we go, we're going to get profound here, but
All right.
I'm sorry to do this to you of all people, because you could like kick my ass as far as
come on.
just knowledge.
I think I got you off track, so let's get back on track.
The one thing I did want to say though was I want to agree with you with the whole. I think young people should have some sort of exposure to that. In that, what do you do? There's a sort of like the lost years for most people tend to be between 17 and like 23, 4, 5, whatever that is. There's something that happens in there. It's great growth, but there's also a sort of nomadness with direction. And it seems like with this, there's some focus on at least some on knowledge and experience of this bigger picture that you're talking about, and I kind of agree with that.
Well, it's true.
It's controversial, though.
And well, it's not controversial in terms of the physiology of growth and how we grow. I mean, our brains are not really fully formed until we get to 25. Some say older.
Myelination and all that.
I don't know what it's called, but I know that you basically, your thinking mechanism is not mature when you're 18 or 17. I mean, I look back on some of the stuff I did.
Me too.
And it never crossed my mind that it was totally insane and irrational. I mean, in a way, you'd like to be able to, but you don't live very long if you live that way. There's no way I could do some of the stuff that I did back then.
So that's what I'm kind of saying.
I wouldn't survive. I just wouldn't.
It's almost like it's just some guidance or whatever during those years. It just doesn't seem to be we've kind of forgotten that there needs to be, that's the concept of mentorship and the concept of apprenticeship and all of that.
Yeah, and then the concept of, it isn't mindless discipline. It's not mindless discipline, but there is something about the intense working with a group. A lot of kids get it in football. A lot of kids get it.
Exactly.
It's not that you miss it if you're up for it in high school. If you are out for sports and if you go out and play those games, the outward bound game, finding out what are your limits. I didn't know physically what my limits were. I didn't know I could carry a 100-pound pack and walk 6 miles or 16 or whatever. I've forgotten, but it was painful. And get up at 4 in the morning, having gone to bed at 2 in the morning, at least on a basis of a lot of times. But that's the way the Army was.
All right, but that discipline has also helped you through the years as far as your touring. You are constantly playing. You are a touring musician.
Yeah. Well, I'm not anymore. I wish I were, but there's just a little problem, and that is the venues have disappeared. I mean, in my heyday, I jokingly refer to it as a 25-year-long paid vacation because I was traveling pretty much constantly. And even when I lived in Los Angeles, as much as I wanted to win in that particular game, which is to be an actor, I had an agent and this and that. It took me a long time to learn, and by the time I got around to figuring it all out, the easy time had passed. I'd stopped looking like really good and so forth and so forth. I was just this old guy, But at any rate, what I did was to travel. And I traveled, and we had a circuit of clubs, and then I added college residencies because that English degree helped, because it gave me a credential. And so people like, what's his name? Robert Waller. Do you remember the Bridges of Madison County?
Yes.
Typical situation. He's teaching at the University of Northern Iowa in economics, but he happens to be a closet folk singer. And so he has me, I go there for a residency, and one of the people who has me come into his economics classes is Bob Waller. So I talk about English, and I sing my Flanders and Swan songs and talk about it, but I also talk about alternatives of the kind that were now common that we're used to, economic differences, things he knows about. And then anytime it flags, we do a song, and he can sing too, so he sings the Dutchman.
Nice.
At any rate, this was Bob Waller, who ended up retiring from UNI and the economics department, which by that time I think he was the head, because he wrote the Bridges of Madison County. He moved to Texas, and I don't know what he's done since then.
Lived happily ever after.
But I worked, the reason I ended up here is because I ended up in Keokuk, of all places, having spent, 3-4 visits to Western Illinois University. And it was doing that week-long residency that made that happen. So anyway, I did that. I traveled and traveled and traveled, hundreds of thousands of miles.
And that added to your writing?
It did, except that it was also a distraction. Traveling and performing in and of itself. I did not focus like my famous ex did, or some of the other examples. Michael, another person I think is a wonderful performer and singer is what's his name? The other guy from Ontario, from Aurelia. Oh, come on, we know his name. If you could read my mind.
Gordon Lightfoot.
Gordon Lightfoot. Gordon Lightfoot, God love him, he's still working. He's still out on the road, razor thin, but he's still out there.
And with health problems and all that.
Oh, having survived great difficulty. He wrote a song a day. And he did it, and he was in the CBC choir, and he read music beautifully, so he wrote his own lead sheets. But he was absolutely focused on this, and it made him. The same with Gabe, the same with Joni, the same with Michael. They all, each in his or her own way, made it that way. I was the grasshopper, the classic jump from here to there and around.
But you know what? Did you think of that as the road less taken, and therefore fill in the blank?
It was the easy road.
Or maybe the road.
I learned. I just I keep learning. 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, I got 2 new knees. And I had to recover in the only way you do it, which is baby steps. You recover your form, and you do endless amounts of rehab, and it all comes back. Except that your knees are made with steel and nylon instead of gristle and bone. So anyway, this is a typical thing. Learning how to play the guitar. You spend your whole life learning how to do it, but you still can learn, and you practice and you practice. That's what I did on the road, although you can't play the guitar while you're driving, but I certainly ran all my poetry and I ran all my song lyrics, and I thought on my feet as I do. That's where I wrote songs. And I have endless scribbles on little pieces of paper as I drove down the road, writing with one hand on the wheel and one hand on the ballpoint pen.
Exactly.
Writing bits and pieces. What I referred to as just scattered stuff, scribbles.
Scribbles and scattered stuff. When I was looking through stuff that I owned and that I was trying to clean out from like a filing cabinet, I found bags of envelopes and napkins and things that I was writing on
Napkins
over the years.
are really great.
Napkins were fun. It was like, they don't feel good, it felt cool to be writing on a napkin.
And then when you've achieved the state of late-night bourbon non-ordinary consciousness, you try to read what you wrote the next morning. And that was really, really good when I wrote it down. Looks like you know what now.
Right. Or this the next day, and it's like, oh God, that's really bad. What was I doing?
Well, yeah, I did that. I had friends who got stoned and wrote, and so I said, well, I'm going to get stoned and wrote, and I'd toke up to death. This was back in the 60s. And I'd play and I'd write and I'd look at it the next day and I'd think, this is crap, And I discovered that, yes, it does make a difference, but what you have to do is it's multi-drafts, and it's play and play and play, and it's do and do and do. Yeah. And I have no doubt. All you have to do is ask performers and entertainers whether or not this works. And it does for some people, but it doesn't for everybody. Yeah. And some people, it shuts them down. Yeah. And they acknowledge that, too.
Some people, it removes the filters, and I think that they maybe are the ones that function the best with that. But on the other hand, there are those that are just, their perception is just so skewed that they can't.
I can leave this with one. 3 years ago at NERFA, which is one of these, it's a folk alliance gathering in New England, Michael Smith did a show. He did the showcase, and he started on a song which he wrote entitled "Life Gets Pretty Zippy When You Give Up Smoking Weed," or doing weed. I've forgotten the exact lyrics. But he'd hardly gotten three bars into this thing when the entire audience, which was composed of 40 and 50-somethings who had led zippy lives for many years, they were on their feet. They gave him a standing ovation in the middle of the song and loved it and sang with him. They all knew the damn thing. And it's very funny. It's very fast. You got to be straight to sing it. And it's a wonderful song. I highly recommend it.
Right, it makes you be straight to sing it too. That's kind of funny too.
Well, yeah, and
counterpoint.
He who knows where he got this experience that allowed him to write this song.
That's right.
But it's an absolutely wonderful, wonderful song.
Chuck, you are an absolutely wonderful, wonderful person. I wish we had a lot more time, but let me shut up for a while, and I would love it if you could play some songs for us. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'd love to. Let me see if this thing's still in tune.
All right, we're going to be tuning up, and as we're tuning up,
it's in tune.
All right, we are in tune.
Let's just do it.
And we are just moments away from hearing Chuck. Let's actually let you be alone on the set.
Okay.
I'm not going to be your running commentary.
All right.
But Fairfield, here is Chuck Mitchell. We are honored to have him here, and we'll see you later with another segment.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mike.
Thank you so much. This
Be
is
well.
wonderful. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Chuck Mitchell, and I'm going to sing you some Chuck Mitchell songs. You see me taking it easy, that's what I try to do. In new places, I face new faces and sing a song or two. Old soft shoes said a doodle-a-doo. Hey, I'm a good time rambling man. I'm playing Raggedy Andy, looking out for Raggedy Ann. Hey, you're a tall one, you're moving so breezy, you smile, and I do too. And I get this foolish feeling the likes of me likes you. Old soft shoe, doodle-a-doo. Well, I'm a good time, a rambling man, playing Raggedy Andy, looking out for Raggedy Ann. I just want to hold your hand. Simple pleasures have their season, then perhaps some ginger snaps and a cup of tea with lemon. Old soft shoe, I say a doodle-a-doo. I'm a good time rambling man, playing Raggedy Andy. Come on and be my Raggedy Ann. Pitter-patter up my stairs, I can see you standing there. Will you wake me up to say, twinkle, twinkle, lovely day? Oh, you're a ginger girl, you're an auburn lady, saucy as a moppet, not too easy to handle. Day bright eyes, laughter rising, not dream soft as the light of a candle. You see me taking it easy, that's what I try to do. But I'm so glad you fancy me, you're happy that I fancy you. Oh, there's the old soft shoe, happy with you, you got a good time, a Raggedy Man. I'll be your Raggedy Andy, you be my Raggedy Ann. Hey, I'm your Raggedy Andy, you're my Raggedy Ann. Va-va-va-voom. Follow up with the Bing Crosby song, huh? I decided I was going to do 3 love songs. This is number 2. Beat up, bop, bop, ba, da, ba. If good times were thin dimes, I'd share a whole handful with you. Like 2 kids turned loose on Main Street, Saturday afternoon and nothing to do. But that's old hat, that celluloid collar, even though 10 dimes still make $1. Some people are funny, they like folding money. Maybe my silver jingle's just small change to you. If odd gifts could make shifts in contrary minds, I would bring you a carload of notable finds. Some napkin rings, silver spoons, a matching set of pet raccoons, a bottle of bath salts, a case of Jack Daniels, a framed oil painting of 2 cocker spaniels, some ginseng tea, a dancing flea in tiny tights and tutu with a tiny symphony. Performing Claire de Lune on the cat that played the fiddle for the cow that jumped over the moon. If odd gifts could make shifts in otherwise contrary minds. If new loves were gray doves with soft-colored feathers, I'd invite you to my place, babe. We could fly there together. But that's old hat, yeah. I've had my fun collecting things like 12-bar blues and one-night flings. I've had my share of stormy weather, motorcycles and chains and leather, and I've got just one more line to change your contrary mind. Come on, baby. If good times were thin dimes, I'd share a whole lifetime with you. Yeah. I know it sounds incredible. If odd gifts could make shifts in contrary minds. If new loves were gray doves with soft-colored feathers. If my dreams were moonbeams, I would light up your garden. Hey, I know it sounds incredible, but if fantasies were edible, I'd get chubby. Just thinking of you. Yes, indeed. It's sad but true that sometimes it doesn't quite work out the way you'd like it to. Sometimes. New books of love. Old books of love. those books of love. New books of love say letting go, letting love be easy, sensible and right, and always wise. Friends, including you, agree that love will win out. Wait and see. Seems to me this wait and see's losing in disguise. Old books still tell their stories of lovers star-crossed, lost in time. Stories that re-echo in my mind. Once upon a night, by firelight, in your eyes dancing, I was reading through a life of you and loving every line. And my heart is full of things I want to tell you. All about the way it was before. Problem is that if you don't remember of your own accord, I wonder if it matters anymore. My quest has no direction if I'm losing you and wasting me out here slaying dragons by the score. So I've won it all, and all I want is home and company. My armor's gone. It's dangerous to wander anymore. And you are here beside me, shining softly in the darkness. My heart will hold that light, my wounds will mend. How your heart glows, or what it knows of me, is a foolish guess. I've just now learned how love songs grow, not how love stories end. And my heart is full of stories I would tell you, all about the way it was before. The problem is that if you don't remember of your own accord, I wonder if it matters anymore. I wonder if it matters anymore. That's it. Thank you. Have a good night.